In the tapestry of life, where every thread holds a story, America in Black and White emerges as a haven for the voices echoing through the heart of our communities. In this podcast, we wade through the rivers of our collective experiences, celebrating the vibrant hues of change brought forth by the whispers of hope and the roars of action. It's more than just a conversation. It's a journey into the heart of our society, illuminated by the light of those daring to dream and do. Join us, and let your voice be the melody that guides us toward a dawn where every color finds its place in the masterpiece of our shared destiny. Together, let's paint a future brimming with the positives that dwell in our minds and the actions that shape.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of America in Black and White. Tonight we have a very special show. We have retired Air Force Colonel Ivan Thompson as our guest tonight. Ivan is a seasoned author with over 35 published titles. His books are available on Amazon.com, and many are available as audiobooks on Audible.com. Ivan's Christian books give scriptural advice on such topics as being a Christian in the workplace, being a better father, discovering your purpose, finding the next step in your purpose, God's healing power, growing in confidence, recovering from brokenness, and increasing your skills and abilities in any area. Several of these books are on audiobooks are also available in Spanish. Ivan's 3 exceptional books about diversity in the Air Force have garnered rave reviews and impacted Air Force policy. They are available on Amazon, one also on Audible. Ivan has over 25 years of experience consulting, conducting senior leadership offsites, and strategic planning sessions. He served as deputy director of the Defense Business Practice Implementation Board. As a deputy, he helped facilitate task groups for the Secretary of Defense comprised of senior DoD civilians and retired and active Fortune 500 CEOs. Ivan is also a singer, songwriter, actor, business consultant, and inventor. He is a retired Air Force officer with 5 adult children and resides in New York City. He graduated from the United States Air Force Academy in 1986 with military distinction and as the outstanding cadet in organizational behavior. He earned his master's degree in management from Regent University in Virginia Beach, Virginia in 1995. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring to the show Mr. Ivan Thompson. Hello, sir. How are you?
Charles, how you doing?
I am doing great. Just had a couple of difficulties there in the beginning, but all is well.
No problem, no problem.
So is there anything you'd like to add to your bio before we start the show?
I just sent in the 4th book for my 4th book in the series for Air Force Diversity. I sent it in today to Amazon, so hopefully it'll be published tomorrow.
Oh wow, congratulations.
Thank you.
And
Thank
what
you.
is what you say the title of that book is?
The title is The Air Force's Black DEI Myths.
Oh wow.
The Air Force's Black DEI Myths. That's the title.
Oh, okay, that says a lot on its own.
I hope so. Hopefully it'll catch people's attention and make them want to go out and get it.
Yes, sir. So we're gonna start with leadership because I can in just getting to speak with you, I can see that leadership was one of those things that you had the fortunates of actually being able to lead people. Can you tell us what leadership principles have guided you throughout your career?
Wow. I guess as a Christian, most of my leadership theories have been impacted by that. But I mean, it's as simple as caring for the people that work for you, and that means not just helping them be able to do their job better, remove obstacles. Because usually, as the boss, you're not touching anything. Somebody else is fixing anything. The joke when I was in Arizona was, "Sir, stay away from the equipment. Don't touch the equipment." But you're the mother may I person. If they need, resources for new tools, or they need to change a procedure or a policy, so you need to be a listener. You need to figure out, how do I serve you so that you can serve the unit? How do I make things better for you? But then that's one part at work. But then also have an ear open to what might be going on at home. Are they having family problems? Is there a sick kid? Is there an aging parent? Something like that, because that affects their work performance. But it also, if you're genuine about it, if you show someone that you genuinely care, you're going to get more out of that person. But you can't fake that, and so leadership is a balance between trying to get the job done at work while making sure you understand you're taking care of the person. There's a whole bunch of leadership theories on that, whether you're a people person or a task person. But I think you can be both. I think you can care about the people that work for you genuinely, and at the same time hold a high standard, because the leader sets the standard. The leader sets the vision, the goals. He says, this is the way we're going. This is how fast, how high we're going to get there. And sometimes you push, and sometimes you push hard. We think about great coaches. I'm a Warriors fan. You never see Steve Kerr yelling at Steph Curry. He needs to yell at Draymond sometimes, but
Yeah, you're exactly right.
I mean, and Pop, we think of different, the coaches set the bar high. We all have our own different style, but we're still trying to take a team somewhere. A leader's not just a nice person. There's something he's aiming towards and guiding people toward. And so some of that is, from his training, some of that is from his personality and, and leadership gifts. And so in terms of guiding, I always thought about trying to help that person both at home and at work, help them get promoted, help them get to the next job. And then sometimes there's another side to that. There's the other side of that coin is sometimes you got to help people get out the way, because there are some bad actors. And for the good of the team, I have to remove the bad actors or try to keep them from being bad actors, and there's ways to do that. You first you try to talk, hey, this behavior is not accepted, or hey, you're doing this wrong. You give people a space. The Bible talks about space to repent. You get people kind of change their way now, but some people are hard headed. We had a saying when I was a kid, we can't sit on the air. Hard head makes for a soft, but hi, how about that? And that's true with adults too. Some people get in their head, they're going to do things their own way, even in the military or on work. And sometimes you got to, write a piece of paper up and put it in their file, or even worse, sometimes you have to fire someone because their actions are affecting the whole team. That was hard for me because I tried to be a people pleaser early on in life. And I realized I had to trick myself because I always thought it was being mean if you said something harsh to somebody, or I shouldn't say harsh, but corrected somebody. Confrontation, I thought was mean. Then I had to realize if I don't confront him or her and they bring the unit down, I'm doing the whole unit a disservice. And so as a result, I had to remove people, after warnings and pieces of paper, documentation. Sometimes you just got to get rid of some people because some people just won't change. That's why we have police officers in prison and stuff like that. Judges. But yeah.
Way.
Yeah. So I think leadership is trying to get the best out of people, the more I get to know you, the more I get to understand what you could do. Because as a leader, I like moving people around, kind of like if you use a football analogy, like Michael Parsons, let's put him out here at defensive end. Well, no, let's move him around, and see where's his best fit. Maybe you haven't had the opportunity to really shine. Maybe there's something you really want to do, no one's let you do. And then as a leader, if I get to know you, and know what your strengths are, maybe I can move you into a place where we can get the most out of you. I like that part of being a leader.
So how has your experience in the Air Force shaped your leadership style?
Well, the Air Force made me come out of my fear of confrontation, because right away as a boss, I had to confront people that were doing things that were inappropriate or, weren't going to get the job done. So it forced me as the boss, the person that signed the evaluations, the person that set the goals, to confront, and to grow in that area. So I mean, I was good at if you were a good worker, if you were a pleasant person, I was good. I was already good at that. I'm already a people person, but I wasn't good at confronting I became better also. Even though I majored in organizational behavior, that was my major at the academy, and I was the top grad in my major. The actually putting my hands on it and moving people around and changing the organization, that caused me to grow, and it helped me in the military. We have usually commanders are only in place for a year or two. So if you're stationed at a base for 3 years or 4 years, your boss, your commander is going to change at least once or twice. So you figure in a 20-year career, you're going to have a lot of leadership examples to look at. Maybe that might not be the same case in a civilian example, but in the Air Force, that guy in charge of the base, the wing commander, or that 4 star is only going to be there maybe 2, 3 years. That wing commander is going to be there a year, year and a half. So you get to see a lot of different leadership styles and a lot of ways to get things done. And some stuff you put in your tool bag, and some stuff you go, I would never. That's something I don't want to do. I learned from you by learning what not to do, how not to treat people. So I would say being in the Air Force gave me a lot of leadership examples to learn from and to kind of pick and choose from to enhance. I was thinking of the guy with in the Avengers movie Endgame, where he got all the stones. You start putting them in his thing. You start picking up different things from leaders, and it increases your ability as a leader. And so there's certain things I wasn't good at, but I saw another leader, and I went, yeah, if this comes up, I would do it like that. Or if this comes up, I definitely wouldn't do it like that. And so I think just being around a whole bunch of different leaders, who were my bosses and watching how they operated really expanded if I had arrows in my quiver, more arrows, more tools to work with when I'm leading with people. Cause and then I got to see some hard things. I got to see, be in a unit where somebody left a suicide note. I got to be in a unit where there was a rape charge, where there were threats against somebody's life, where there's a lot of serious things where, because you think military, you think combat. I never deployed. I was in the basement of the Pentagon post 9/11 and worked some serious things like that, but I was never really in harm's way. So I didn't have that part of it. But in terms of like dealing with somebody who's up for court martial or dealing with one of my troops, his son, I think his son was in a car crash that either killed somebody or almost killed somebody. Just some serious things of that nature that you got to kind of figure out, okay, how do we handle this? Or we found out this one in our unit, we had a guy that a couple of guys were posting up girly magazines. Now, granted, this was the early 90s. Things are a little bit different now, but I mean, new magazine cutouts in the work center with females in it. You got to hit somebody in the head with a stick for that. You don't get to, because everybody knows that's wrong. And the fact that one of their supervisors let this go on, when we found out about it, we had to hit that dude with a big stick, the supervisor. We're going to hit you with a really big stick, and your career probably is not going to recover from it, but the atmosphere they let stand in that work center contributed to these guys hitting on this one lady, because if I could put up nudies and they let the guys change clothes in the work center and talk about the weekend and what they did, all this stuff was permitted in the work center, and it kind of facilitated this environment that everything was okay. So then they figured they could start flirting with the girls in the work center and harassing them. It was ugly. But as a leader, once we found out about it, now we have to do something about it, and so those kind of things, I think, I know caused me to grow in a way. Maybe I don't know. I've been in civilian jobs where something like that might have got somebody fired, but not put in like military jail. I mean, like, you do something like that, your military career is over. You may even go to military jail, whereas like you're working somewhere else, you might just get fired. So I think there's a little bit more to it. You lose that 20-year retirement and the pension and the benefits. That's a big deal. Or if, like this one guy, he ended up getting I'm trying to think if both of them got court-martialed. I think they got court-martialed for going to this girl's house and threatening her and making sexual harassment, and harassing her in different ways. I think they got court-martialed. That's a big deal. And so it's a lot of weight, or sometimes, I was in headquarters and I'm briefing 3-star generals, routinely had to do that. And I think that's helped me for the kind of things I do now, speaking stuff, where I was very fortunate to be in jobs where I worked for senior officers. And when you go in there, you can't be stumbling, fumbling, falling off, boom. You got to hit it. This is what I want to do, and this is why, and here's why you should approve it, and be able to handle tough questions on the fly. Because usually senior leaders have a very short attention span, and they'll shoot you in the face if you're not prepared. You might do it once. You'll learn. You don't want to learn that way. You don't want to learn by being unprepared, get kicked out. That's never happened to me. I never got kicked out, but I've seen it. I've seen people get lightning bolts from Thor, or from Zeus, because they came in to brief the general and they weren't prepared or didn't anticipate simple questions. So I think those things have helped me as a man, in terms of even just not being in the military anymore, in terms of just thinking things through and presenting myself, making my case. Yeah, and then even a lot of things I write about in terms of leadership and diversity, a lot of those lessons came out of that as well. When I see, as an African American leader in the military, how African American leaders are treated or how they operate and how it's different for us, that's the gift that keeps on giving. Because I just finished writing a over 500-page book and hit send today on just that, and that's the 4th of the series. So you figure you add up all these books together, it's probably like 800 to 1,000 pages of just leadership and African American experience within the Air Force, and how that goes, because it is a different experience to be a leader and be the only one in the room that looks like you or that feels like you, or to be a leader and you don't see in government offices and military buildings, a lot of times they'll have like the picture on the wall of the president.
Yes.
And the leader of that building, whether it's the VA or military, they have all the previous commanders. In some places like Langley and in Virginia, everybody that's ever been a commander of that base, his picture's up there, and they're all white.
Right.
And sometimes I wrote in one of my books, the pictures whisper to you, you'll never be one of us.
So,
and
do you think that leading by example is the better way of leadership, or do you think having a hands-on experience is a better form of leadership?
Well, it's really both. I mean, I don't think there are some people, and we've done it as parents too, do as I say, not as I do. And we know that's not the best way to go. But I always felt like I should be in there with my troops. I showed up, management there was a guy named Tom Peters from way back in the Total Quality days. He talked about managed by walking around. I would show up in the middle of the night. I would show up unexpected, but I would also help. I would jump in there and do whatever needed to be done to help. But I'm carrying my example in there when I help. So like one of my guys, he used to always come late, and I was like, and he would disappear during the day, and people wouldn't know where it was. I put a little sticky on my door when I'm out, because I'm the boss. Usually people want something from me, sign this, approve that, so I can go do my job. So I'll put a note. So if I'm out, they know when I'm coming back or where to find me so they can get their job done. And I was trying to communicate that to this one guy who worked for me. I was like, hey, I'm the boss of 80 people. And I put a note on my door. When you're gone, no one knows where you are. You're not really, being responsive to the people that you serve. So yeah, people were always looking at you. And then I remember as a young lieutenant, being African-American, being one of the only ones, I was like, well, as long as they're looking, I'm gonna give them something to look at. I want to be sharp. I want to do my job well. But then also, like I said, I want to be personable. I want them to know I'm a real person, that I care. And sometimes I'm gonna jump in there and help do whatever it is they're doing, as long as I'm not in the way, depending on the job.
So as a leader, when you've got some guys, as you're talking about, that's struggling with what it is to be structured and disciplined, how do you handle those kind of people from a leadership perspective?
Sometimes I guess you kind of got to figure out, is it how can I put that? Because I'm thinking of different people, because some people just don't have the aptitude. I don't mean that in a bad way. I shouldn't say that. The ability to lead, like I'm thinking of this one guy. He was a higher ranking guy. He came to our unit, and we're a fast paced unit. We had a lot of stuff going on, and he had a lot of rank, but he didn't really have the ability to lead at the pace that I wanted to move at. There were some lower ranking people that were really better at it than him. So I really kind of had to move him off to the side and give him less responsibility than what was on his shirt. He was a nice guy. He wasn't a bad actor. Now that's kind of like somebody who doesn't have the ability. There's people who maybe they're trying to grow into a position of responsibility. Maybe they just got promoted, or by rank they're the ranking person, and you try to train them on the go. Hey, this is what I expect, and this is what it should look like when you're doing it, and I try to lay out the expectations. I try to coach. The younger you are, probably the more latitude you have. The newer you are, the more latitude you have. I used to have a phrase. We had a lot of people we call E6s, tech sergeants in the military. We used to call them tech sergeants. I assume they still do.
Well, that's
in the Air Force. Yeah, Air Force. And I would say master sergeants. For me, a master sergeant is a person who leaps tall buildings in a single bound. I tell them one time and they get it done. And so my expectation for a master sergeant, I'll tell you one time, you go out and figure it out. Mm-hmm. You a staff sergeant, you a senior airman, I might give you a lot more mentoring, a lot more, hey, let me show you how I want it done. Or, tell your boss, hey, depending on where you are, you get more grace. Just like, you have kids, if you're the older kid, you expect something out of older kid than you do out of younger kids. So now there are some people who are on skates. Some people are trying to skate. Some people are trying to slide by and do the minimum. And so once I find out it's not ability and it's not coaching, it's just really you're either lazy. I've had some people. We had this one guy. We called him the ghost.
Oh wow!
He's a civilian employee, and he kept getting moved from job to job because nobody wanted him. They gave him to us. And I told my boss, there's a reason. The people don't just give bodies away. There's a reason they're giving this man away. Just called him the ghost, man. He would disappear, and I really had to come down on him hard, a lot of times, because he just didn't want to do any work. He wanted to get paid. Wanted to be respected, but didn't want to do any work. And so those kind of people, they're not in the majority, but there are some people out there just trying to skate or just do the minimum. Now, see, if you just kind of doing the minimum, don't be surprised when your rating reflects that you're doing the minimum. Like I used to tell people that, in terms of ratings, you want the best rating, but you leave on time. You come on time, you leave on time. You never stay late. Not that I want to build an attitude of workaholism, but you never do anything extra in the unit. Nobody sees you. So if there's somebody, one of your peers, that's doing the extra in the unit, when I'm rating everybody, because you can't. In those days, they didn't call it a pyramid, but it was kind of implied that only the top people can get the highest ratings. And then, I said, well, the top ratings are going to go to the people who do extra, who go over and above, because you already being compensated before you get your rating. You get every 2 weeks, you get compensated. Uncle Sam sends you a check based on what's on your shoulder. So you're getting paid. If you want more than that, you want awards, you want the highest ratings, you're going to have to be amongst your peers. It's a competition. It's just like stepping on the field. If you want to get off the bench, and make the starting five on a basketball court, you got to be better than the five that's out there, or show something that you have, in certain situations. Oh, we need scores. So you're a 3-point shooter. We're going to bring you off the bench and put our defender over there and put one of our sharpshooters in. It's like that, and so you try to communicate that to people. It's only unfair when you have a thought about somebody as a leader and you don't communicate that to them. I'm supposed to give you feedback, good or bad. And I wasn't good at initially giving bad feedback, but I have to give you a chance to improve. I can't just, man, you're a bad egg, and just write you up and never tell you what I thought, or never tell you how you could improve. That's not good leadership. Good leadership says, hey, this is the standard, and you're this, you're either above it, below it, or you're approaching it, and then now it's on you to make an adjustment, and if you need help, I can help you, and then my job also is there anything I could do to help you, because sometimes it is us. Sometimes it's the way that we want stuff done, or it's the way we gave the instruction that's messing them up. Once I find that out, I need to make a change. So I got to have this two-way communication that people aren't scared to come to me and tell me, hey, sir, the way you got us doing this is messed up. It's costing us more time, it's costing us rework. So I gotta have where people can talk to me. And so if I'm aloof, or if I'm, the broken glass kind of commander, that's always yelling and screaming at somebody, chances are people will be afraid to come and tell me what's really going on, and it's going to hinder the unit. So as a leader, I gotta be hard enough to maintain the boundaries and set the standards, but approachable enough that you can talk to me and say, sir, this is the way you want to do it. But it's, because I was always told as a lieutenant, go find a sharp senior NCO and get under his wing and learn and learn. And I always took that, and my ex-father-in-law was a retired E9 or a chief master sergeant. Learned a lot from him, and and then how enlisted folks could do you in if they want to. You want to get on the wrong side, these enlisted folks, they hang you out to dry in ways that you won't really understand, by not telling you stuff, by not giving you the extra bit of information that would allow you to be successful. Treat people with respect, regardless of what's on their shoulder. The military says you got to call me sir because I outrank you, but you're still a human being. You're still a person. I can respect that in you, and then you should respect that in me.
So what advice would you give to young professionals aspiring to leadership roles?
I would say now we don't do this very much anymore. These things are like Fred Flintstone. Read some books.
Right.
We want to listen. Now, granted, podcasts, this is a new generation. We got podcasts like this. So I would say go find some leadership examples and start learning from some people. Pick a favorite author, pick a favorite podcast host, and start learning. Granted, you can go to school, you can get a management degree. You don't have to. Some people aren't academics. They don't, the thought of going back to school in a formal classroom setting would freak out some people. But you could listen to a podcast like this. You can, you can take somebody. I'll pick somebody non-traditional that we might not think about at first as a leader, but we all recognize as a leader. Somebody like Oprah. Mm-hmm. And just watch how she talks, watch how she moves. What would she do in this situation? Maybe like I couldn't say President Obama, that's too easy. But there's different people that you might admire. You can follow them and follow their posts on Instagram. So that's we can glean. That's an old-fashioned word from people in a lot of different ways. But my first thing I would say to young leader is find a mentor, find some leadership examples that you can learn from. I guess that's really two things. Find some examples to learn from, and then a mentor that you can bounce things off of. This is what I'm learning. This is my situation. Hey, mentor person, how would you do this? Or what do you recommend? In the military, we get a lot of that. I almost said, well, I can say it, force fed, because we're made to go to professional military education while we're in our commissioning program. ROTC Academy, but then we got SOS, Squadron Officer School. As a major, you go to Air Command and Staff College. As a 05 and above, you go 05, you go to Air War College. I'm an Air War College graduate. Then generals go to school. They go to a school and you always get leadership training and all this other stuff. I always thought in the civilian sector, sometimes people might be, I'll use academics. Somebody might be a great teacher, but not a good principal, an administrator. They're a subject matter expert, but they never got any training on how to deal with people. I see the same thing sometimes in church. They might be an on fire preacher or know the word or have different ministry gifts, but no idea how to supervise people or how to talk to people, how to help groom people, and prepare them for the next step, because that wasn't part of their training, And so I would say learn some leadership principles. Find somebody you admire that you think is doing a good job leading, and learn from them, whether it's their podcast, their Instagram, their book, their audio book, and then find a mentor, somebody that's doing what you want to do someday. See if you can get close to them. You can get close to somebody by reading their book, following them on LinkedIn, reading their posts on LinkedIn. But you may even be able to find somebody that you can have a personal relationship with and call them up sometime. And I have people like that, and I'm still, matter of fact, one of them, His name is General Larry Spencer. This is his book called Dark Horse. He went from enlisted to 4-star general. I met him when he was a major, and then he just kept getting promoted. And so he's on my list of people that I could call and reach out to when I was in the military. And then even after the military, I could reach out to him and say, hey, sir, I need help, or just reading his book. His book, these are the best kind of books because they're not that thick. It's not that thick, but it's got a lot of leadership lessons in it, yeah. So they used to say readers are leaders, but that might be for us AARP people, that might be appropriate. Some of these young folks may not even know, like cursive. Books have gone away. Read a book, writing cursive has all gone away. So people might be more prone to get that, but you're not just gonna automatically be a good leader without training and education and mentorship. You're not going to nobody's just a natural leader. Even on the sports field, there's people that have great ability. You'll see somebody, I'll use Jalen.
Just great instincts. Great instincts.
You might be a good people person, but okay, now you're the star quarterback and they're expecting you to do certain things. And, how do you learn that? Somebody's, I don't know who they talk to, who they look at, but there's a process to it. It's not some people, oh, you're just a natural leader. I think there's a degree of that, a bit of that might be true, but whatever that natural amount of leadership is, like a seed, it can be watered and it can grow with education, with mentoring, with watching other people, and you just add leadership lessons to what you already have, and then your leadership ability grows and grows, because as in the military, you don't stay the same rank. The first 2 years I was a second lieutenant, then I was a first lieutenant, then I was a captain. And if you keep getting promoted, your span of control increases and your responsibility increases. So if your leadership ability doesn't increase, you're in trouble. Because you're going to eventually, get to the end of your rope if you don't grow as a leader. And then for me, growing as a leader was dealing with the hard things, the hard people, people that challenged you, people that, told you were wrong. People tell me I was wrong. I'm the boss, and being able to hear what you have to say and then really figure out if I am wrong. And sometimes I was, and sometimes I wasn't. I remember one place where all my direct reports came in like a mutiny, sat around the table. They all told me I was wrong, but what they didn't know was that my boss, I'm new. My boss told me none of them in that building knew what the hell they were talking about. He sent me in there and straightened them out. So I finally had to tell him, I'm like, hey, look, this is from the big boss. He said, none of y'all know what y'all doing down here. They didn't like that, and they didn't believe it. But, I'm the boss, and I had to finally just tell them, hey, look, the rank on the shoulders, this rank right here, this says we're going to do it my way. So when I left, they did in the luncheon, they sang Sinatra. He did it his way, and we did it right. Because the first thing is the wing boss said, hey, these folks down in this unit, they don't know what the hell's going on. You're going in there to straighten that out. Tried to straighten it out without telling them, but they kept telling me I was wrong. And I was okay. I didn't want to play this card, but let me play this joker right here, this big joker.
Okay.
Our boss said we need to change, so it's my job to carry out his orders, and you're going to have to do what I say. And then eventually I won over the next ranking person who was a civilian. She came to see that the way they were doing things was just out of touch. And once I won her over, then she started winning over, because there was a bunch of civilians. She won them over, but they were like in their own little world. They're a customer service organization, not going to visit the customers anymore. Customers hadn't seen them. I'm like, how you never visit the customer? What's up with that? They should come to us. I'm like, we're going to change that. On your calendar, we're going to put dates on the calendar where you're going to go visit the customer, talk to them, ask them what you should be doing for them. I remember going one place, one unit, and they go, we've never seen anybody for this office over here. I'm looking at the person. I look over the person like, really? They go, this is nice. And here's what we need. I'm like, oh, wow. I didn't know that's what you needed. And of course we don't know, because we don't ever come over anymore. We just figured, you'll come to us when you need us. But leadership is, taking folks in the right direction, even if they don't want to go, and how do I could make you go, The one lady, I won her over. Then my right hand, I ended up winning her over. Everybody else just had to go. Carrot and stick. You either get the carrot or the stick. I want to give you the carrot, but if you don't take the carrot, I will give you stick.
I don't think they wanted to stick.
Yeah, and I know how to use the stick very well. That I learned that because I had to work with union employees. I had to work with, there's checks and balances even in the military system. You just can't write somebody a bad report. Somebody's going to see it and challenge you and to justify why you, which is a good thing because people's careers could be ruined. And with civilians, you got to go through the union. You got to convince the union why, and to do that, you got to have all this paperwork. Well, on this day, they was late. On this day, they was late. On this day, they called out. Here's this stack of paper to be able to, do something against a union employee. But I'm up to the task. If you really want to clown, you have met the ringmaster at the circus. I know how to deal with clowns. The Air Force taught me that.
So, can you share a moment where leadership made a significant difference in your life or career?
Something like a higher person's leadership?
If it's a higher person's leadership, but it made a significant difference in your life or your career.
Okay. I'm thinking of this one general that I had early on in my career where the way that, well, I'm going to use that one. I'll use another one. There was a boss that I had who I really, really admired, and his leadership style affected the way that I led. He was very personable. He had this one staff sergeant that was like his hunting buddy. They would go off duty. He was a major, and this was a staff sergeant, his hunting buddy. And his hunting buddy got into a disagreement with his wife, real heavy argument, whatever, and shot off a firearm in the sky on base. Can't do that. And I watched this major sit across from the table with his hunting buddy, and I'm in the room because the guy worked for me, and tell him to his face, I'm gonna write you Article 15. And I thought, wow, that was so powerful to me because it showed me, even though I have to be personable and we might have a cool off-duty relationship, if you break the law, in this case he did, I still gotta do my job. And there's times later in my career where I had like a neighbor who worked in my office. I got promoted first, so now I'm the boss. And I kind of had to do some, rough things to him because I was the boss. And he was kind of acting out. But this guy showed me, and I seen him go to the wall, even to this same officer. I saw him go to bat for a chief master sergeant whose son almost killed somebody, ran a red light or whatever. And he went to bat against the general because the general was trying to do this chief in, and my major boss put his oak leaves on the line and went to bat for this chief to the wall, fell on his sword. And I just watched his compassion for people and how he cared about people. And I thought that always stuck with me and helped me as a leader in terms of, what I was willing to do for my people and, and how I could be both, maintaining order and standards, but at the same time be compassionate. I never forgot that. So that was probably one of my favorite examples of a boss and leadership.
So what qualities do you believe make a great leader?
Empathy, being able to understand what's going on maybe in their personal lives, or because they're not robots. It's not iRobot. It's not just or AI, some soulless thing that's doing a task. They're people, and I'm more on the people end. So I would say empathy, vision. Good leaders got to know where we're going and figure out, how to get us there. Communication. I may know where we're going, but I got to be able to communicate well to the folks that are under me, how we're going to get there, how we're going to overcome obstacles. He's got to be a person, as you said, who, to the best of his ability, walks the talk, sets the example. He may or may not be the most you know, everybody doesn't have the same personality traits. Some people just have the gift of gab. You don't necessarily have to be a great talker, but you still got to be able to communicate. And maybe you communicate better in writing, or maybe like the example of Moses and Aaron, you know, maybe you might not be able to say it, but you get somebody else to communicate, you know, and say, hey, this is what the boss wants done, but it gets communicated.
Right.
You should be fair. You know, we have a whole series of regulations on Friday night. Every time you pick up the Air Force Times, the Army Times, Navy Times, there's some commander that slept with somebody with stripes on, you
Yeah.
know, is showing favoritism. And that's probably the worst example. But I mean, we even talk about, you know, racism and stuff like that. Those are probably the most severe examples. But even just not having favorites, being fair, you know, if somebody does well, that you reward them, you know, getting out there and seeing what people do and telling them that they do a good job. Some people are not really good at that, but again, that's why you have a staff. You know, the things that I'm not good at, that I know need to be done, like recognizing people, I can ask somebody to do that. Hey, who should we put in for, you know, NCO of the quarter? Who do I need to go give an attaboy to? Generals do that. They have their coins and they come to a unit. They go, who do you want me to give a coin to? You know, they don't know those people. In the same way, you know, leaders should be looking to shine the light on good behavior. And then that last part of it, that leader still has to be able to, I always say shoot somebody in the face. That's to be a phrase I used to have. That's probably not appropriate. It's not
Oh, Lord.
politically,
Let's not think of
politically,
how high that goes.
politically correct. You need to, how about put the hammer down? You need to be able to put the hammer down with the bad actors, the people who refuse to go along. You got to be able to have. I'm gonna tell you like this, you know, take off the mask and let out the beast for the people who really want to go there. You really want to find out, you know, you really want to get on my bad side. You know, you really want to push it to that point. I can go there, you know, and so you got to be able to be the enforcer at times too. So I think those are like the main ones. And I think the last part I would be a leader should be growing. You know, you shouldn't be stagnant. You should be growing in your ability as a leader to manage, to counsel, to discipline, to lead, to be more visionary, to be all those things that I said. Be a better communicator, be a better person at setting goals and vision, you know, better at handling discipline matters, you know, and all of those things you need to continue to grow, because you're, you know, in the military, I said you're up or out. You get promoted or you don't. And then once you don't get promoted, you start plateauing. Now you're on a conveyor belt toward retirement. You know, that's not
You
how the
start
military is. You
plateauing,
know,
something's not right.
once you get to a certain level, it's like, you know, you make 06, you either make general, and if you make general, boom, 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 you just keep going, or you don't, and you kind of plateau. But you still should be growing as a leader, you know. But that some of that you're forced to do because you're going to schools and stuff. But some of that you should be your own personal study, and then self-reflection. You know, how am I doing as a leader? How am I handling this job? What could I do better? I think every leader should be asking themselves those questions on their own, not just, you know, because their boss made them do it or because they're thinking about getting promoted.
So let's transition over to your career as an author.
Okay.
Tell us what inspired you to start writing and what was your first book about?
Funny you should ask. So I was I've always had like a desire to write. I thought when I grew up, I wanted to be a consultant after the Air Force. I did internal consulting while I was in the Air Force. So I thought, I just knew I'm going to write a book about leadership principles. And my second book was about leadership principles. But my first book, I was the deputy director of the Defense Business Board, and we're doing a task force on diversity for the SecDef.
Okay.
And a lot of the same kind of topics we're talking about now, but in reverse, because right now everything's anti-DEI. You know, let's tear down everything, you know, on DEI. But at the time, he was looking to increase the number of minority flag officers and senior civilians. So I'm on this task force, and the person that was running the task force was some very high-level civilian who he was a salary negotiator, and two of his clients were Black CEOs. I think at the time it was the CEO of American Express and Xerox. They had Black CEOs, and he was their salary negotiator. So you assume he's a Caucasian man representing these black people, that he must be forward thinking, and no. So he came up with some bogus. After we did all this research, he ended up throwing out all of our research and basically saying we don't have enough college educated minorities in the military to affect the senior landscape. Like, we don't have the talent in the military to have more generals, which was totally bogus or whatever. All the research, I led the military research part of that, meaning I interviewed generals in the Army, the Air Force. They flew me different places of the country. I'm sitting in a room full of Army generals and they're telling me what they think. I have Navy admiral, all this research I did. They excluded it from the study and I quit in protest. And that research 13 years later became the Air Force's Black Ceiling. All the research I had done, I just put it in this book. And and so that first book came out of a passion to, I don't say right or wrong, but I felt like I knew the right answers to why we don't have more. So this book, this is 4 stars. And at the time we didn't have, what this is implying was that there was a barrier between black pilots and becoming 4 stars. And we didn't have General Brown at the time. We had never had a black chief of staff. We had never had I think one black commander of flying forces, General Chappie James, but not Pacific or European command. So I thought I knew the answer to that from my research, and that passion and the passion for the Tuskegee Airmen drove me to finishing this book. So I mentioned them throughout this book because one of the central premises of all my books was, if we could have 900 some odd black pilots in the 1940s, how come we only got 300 some now? That's just, the math ain't mathing. And in the education, like in my current book, I call it the education myth, DEI myths. You mean to tell me, out of whatever population we had, let's say 14 million black people in the 1940s, and now we got thrice that, at least. And then back then, one drop make you, I don't want to say it. That's what my mom used to say, but that's the rule. It was on the Alabama law. So all the people with light skin, dark skin, you were all Negroes. Now we have other different boxes. I hope I'm not offending anybody, but back then the black population was defined as such.
Yes.
And so you're trying to tell me now, in 2025, when our kids can go to schools that black people couldn't even dream of going to back then, that we have less minority talent now than we had then? It's a myth, and so that stuff makes me very animated, makes me very, very passionate about writing about that stuff. And so like that became the first book. And then once I got finished with the first book, then I wrote the leadership book. It was a Christian leadership book, but leadership principles tied to I call them their scriptural origin. So like we could say, do unto others as you would have done unto you. Well, that's the golden rule. We call it the golden rule, but it's scriptural. It's still a good principle for the work center, but people don't want to hear about the Bible in the work center, but it's still. So what I did was I took a lot of these leadership principles I was talking to you about earlier and traced them back to a scripture, scriptural principles. Delegation. Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, taught him delegation. Because Moses used to hear all the cases from all the children of Israel. They would line up for days trying to get to Moses. And he said, this thing you doing will surely wear you out. And he said, why don't you set up captains of 10s and 50s and 100s? And that's the principle of delegation. Now, first time it's mentioned is in scripture, and so whether I take it, so I tried to make up. The second book was based on that, different principles that we know, delegation, stuff like that, and show their scriptural origins. But that wasn't really a new concept. There was a guy 15 years earlier who kind of did something like that called Stephen Covey. Stephen Covey, when you broke some of his stuff down, he was tying it to Proverbs and stuff like that. I was like, oh, this is slick. He called it the highly effective habits, 7 habits of highly effective people. He called it True North, but his True North, a lot of it was stuff right out of Proverbs. Sharpen the saw. That's a proverb, but he made millions of dollars out of tying it to spiritual principles, but not really calling it the Bible. But in terms of your question, the push to get this book done was lessons I learned from the Tuskegee Airmen that I felt would still be valid today based on the research, and I wanted to honor the Tuskegee Airmen, one in particular in this book, and get this story out that I was never allowed to share. And that's how the first book came about. And then as I published the second book and then the third book, then I went, whoa, wait a minute. You know, I'm kind of enjoying this, and I have a I won't say a talent. I've learned how to do it, and people are being benefited by the book, the things that I write. And now, like I said, I'll spit out a book. This last book, like I said, I just checked it. It's over 500 pages. This was the largest book I've ever done, and it was a grind. And I've been grinding on it really, really hard for the last month. But most of them, a lot of them aren't like that. A whole box of the books. A book I just ordered, I have about 38 or so published titles, but on different Christian subjects for the most part, and now 4 on diversity. But I communicate. There's so much going on with I'll say our president, because I'll say that. So I've written 3 books kind of related to him. This was before this term, so but it helps me express my feelings, and then I'm also kind of like making a plea. If we say we're Christians and we say that we believe in Christian principles, but we support somebody who does not share those principles, something got to be wrong with that. And so
I think that should tell you that people that look like you are Christian are believing in one thing, and those other folk are believing in something totally different.
Well, I used to be one of those people, and I write about that. I grew up in churches where they said if you're a Christian, you should vote a certain way.
Okay.
We got donkeys and elephants, right? I'm gonna say donkeys and elephants. And
yes.
Depending on what kind of church you go to, they either told you or implied that you should vote donkeys or elephants. And they had, different rules for that, and certain things that donkeys stand for and that elephants stand for. And I was really ingrained in that for a while until they called the orange-headed president came along. And there's some things are being said that I was like, whoa, that's not Christian. That's not Christ-like. That's not Bible. But all my Christian leaders, there's certain Christian leaders that are kind of looking the other way at some of the things he says. And so then I started writing about that. So anything I become passionate about, I start writing about it. And I've written 3 books on that particular subject, and now, who knew that he would come back after January 6th and be in office again, So a lot of those books still have merit, and they still speak very loudly, because the things I was saying then, at the time, they sounded harsh, but now,
it's just second nature.
January 6th is nothing now compared to what's happening now. Woo.
So how do you approach writing about complex topics like diversity and leadership?
Ooh. Well, Charles, I always pray, because as an author, they tell you, who is your audience? Who is this book for? So when I wrote this book, right up front, I said, I wrote this for my white Air Force Academy classmates. I wrote this in 2016 because I believed in 2020 is what I said, that my classmates at the Academy would be the leaders of the Air Force. I wanted to influence them, because most Black people already kind of know what's going on. They live it, but they're not in positions to make change, and then when they get in positions to make change, they have to watch their steps, as we see with General Brown. When General Brown started to make changes, he got cut off at the neck.
Yes.
And so now, as it happens, my prediction about my classmates running the Air Force came true. The current Air Force Chief of Staff is my Air Force Academy classmate. Graduated the same year I did. And so when I write this, I'm trying to influence people who are decision makers. Things out of my books have been, as you read in my bio, implemented into Air Force policy. 4 stars have read my books. One of the previous chiefs of staff started implementing things out of one of my books, out of this book and another book that followed it. That's amazing to me. There's something. So once I got that, that I realized that my book made it into the Air Force Chief of Staff's office and affected policy. Now, granted, one of my friends worked for him and put my book in front of him and put my book in front of other generals so that it could, but the book had to exist for that to happen. So that was a tremendous motivation, that not only is these are just my ideas and something I'm passionate about and that I've researched, these things are affecting or, changing Air Force policy. Unfortunately, we in the military, we're I don't say unfortunately, we're a country where the civilians run the military. We have civilian leaders over the military. So every 4 years, depending on whether it's an R or a D in the White House, things change. So when we had a D in the White House, the chief of staff of the Air Force was able to do a lot of things with diversity. Then we get a R in the White House, and that kind of slows down. And then now we got the same R back in, and not only is it slowing down, they throwing everything out. let's throw everything out. And now we're not just diversity. Let's just throw out all Black history, anything Black. Jackie Robinson was in the military. Let's throw that out. We have women, women too. They're firing all the top Black and white female leaders. The white chief of naval operations, the white chief of the Coast Guard, the white senior military advisor to the SecDef, the white senior female in Europe, General Brown. There's a Black female that ran the department, the health agency, Defense Health Agency. Nobody's really talking about her. I put these people all in my book. It's just like a purge, and we're calling it DEI, but it's really more than that. It's really racism and sexism.
Because it's not DEI, because DEI didn't benefit Black folk; it only benefited white women.
It helped.
DEI hires.
It helped people be considered, and so whatever you want to call it. In my book, I say that DEI is not, that it's a remedy. It's one of the remedies, because the current SecDef, Mr. Hegseth, says that we shouldn't be focusing on people's differences. But the reason we had DEI in the first place is because there were already negative consequences, because people are looking at different people differently, and the results show it. Because in the book and in every diversity study you can ever pick up with the military, Black people have a different outcome or disparity with judicial punishment, with promotions, with schools, with assignments. This disparity is there. And so these things, whether you want to call it affirmative action in the 70s, DEI in the 2020s, whatever, we want to call it, this thing had to happen because this other thing is going on. We can see it. We can see it in the results, that something different is happening to this group of people, and so it was so sad to see General Brown be called a diversity hire when he's the most qualified African-American we've had in the Air Force uniform ever, even more than Chappie James. If you go through his resume, I've written about him in now 4 different books, and for somebody to come in who never made lieutenant colonel, who wasn't even full time, who was, we would call a person, unless they were prior service enlisted, making it to major is like a modest achievement. It's not something you would brag about. Oh, I made major and retired as a major. I got out as a major, and then somebody was arguing with me online, and I was like, I put it in my book. I put the whole transcript of President Trump appointing General Brown to be the chief of staff of the Air Force and all the praise he was putting on him, this whole notion of him being a DEI hire is so ridiculous, because he had to be. In the book, I show how he was more qualified than most of the chiefs of staff that preceded him. I had to put down job titles, because it can't be emotional. I can't just say, with some people you got to put, with all the facts in the world, some people's opinions are not going to be changed. But the hope of the book that I'm writing now is that some people, when they see the facts, their hearts will soften and they will realize, hey, we've been fed some misinformation.
That's where you and I are going to have to work a little bit harder, because it's those things that, from a factual perspective, is that the truth is a lie. The lie is the truth. And despite how you have to try to attack that, you will attack that from 1,000,001 side, and you still miss them, because there are some angles that have just been created that
There's some
these
people
folks are still
you're
able to.
not going to. There's some people, So like in one of my chapters, I put down. It's a whole chapter on what DEI can do. One of them is change opinions, and one of the conclusions I came to in the book is some people's opinions will never be changed. For them, I call them in the book. I use the term the one is too many crowd. One black president, one vice president, one black chairman of joint chiefs of staff, one black self-death was too many for them. It
Yes.
didn't matter how qualified they were. That was too many. In the history of the Air Force, we have had, I think, 11 or 12. I might be off. 11 or 12 black 4 stars, Air Force 4 stars. At any given time on active duty, in any given year, we probably got 11 or 12 4 stars on active duty. So in the history of the Air Force, we've only had 11, but on any given day, there's 11 running around.
I can't
Between
remember how
space,
many we had in the Navy. I can't remember how many we had. I don't know if we had
I
any.
didn't know we'd never had a black service chief until General Brown. I thought there had been a black CNO, but there wasn't. But there was a
Yeah,
black admiral. There's been a black 4-star admiral. He was, I forgot what his name was.
that
Light
must
skin.
have been way back when we had the rank of Commodore.
But I'm just saying, I had never. It's 2020. It's 2025, and there's never been a black chief of staff of the Army. Never been a black commandant of the Marine Corps. Well, the Marine Corps is different because they're not service chief. CNO, chief staff of the Air Force, chief staff of the Army. And so for some people, like I said, the fact that you made it automatically meant you were a DEI hire because you made it. Because you had to have. But and then when you start breaking it down, you start looking. Okay, well let's take the last. I think I took the last 4 or 5 chiefs of staff. Let's put their resumes side by side and see.
Ooh,
Yeah, yeah. But some people, you're talking to a wall, and so I'm not. This in my book, I said this book's not for you. This is for some people who can see facts and say, this is people in leadership, who can be persuaded, because there's so much noise out there. I just saw something today where they said Hexeth is cutting all these generals. He's going to shrink the size of general officers, and they put General Brown in that as an example. General Brown wasn't fired because we're trying to shrink the size of the military. General Brown was fired because they said he was too DEI, and in my book I show that his predecessor really started a lot of the diversity initiatives that he inherited, because his predecessor was on duty when George Floyd died, and every organization in America was trying to say, "Me too. I'm for Black people," because and everybody's Nike, all these organizations, and so the predecessor started all these diversity programs, started diversity study. Well, he retires. Well, guess who gets the results of the diversity study? General Brown.
drops down on
It
him.
was started under him, but now I got to finish it. And we did one on blacks. Well, we can't just have one on blacks. So now we got to do one on women and Asian and Hispanic. And so now it looks like the chief of staff, all he thinks about is diversity. And then if anybody that's been in the business like myself and reading these diversity reports since 2003 knows that they don't go anywhere, knows that they don't make any changes. And actually, when I was looking what General Brown was doing, I was actually a little critical. I was like, I really wanted him to do more. And one of these senior mentors told me, Ivan, they can only go so far, and I was like, eh. And then it happened. Regime change. And they go back to something he said in 2020 about George Floyd 5 years ago and fired him because of that. They can't point to any operational thing that he did wrong. They can't point to anything like Hexeth sending out classified information over the phone. And nothing like that. Stuff that should have got you fired. You weren't qualified to begin with, but then you do something like that the captain knows is wrong. I start thinking about the times I've been disciplined, because I've handled classified since I was a first lieutenant. And the times I've been disciplined or in trouble was for handling classified. Nothing like that. The whole operation, little things. And I'm in a vault. I left the document on top of a safe in a secure vault with an alarm. Got a little talking to, and then one time, one of my troops was mishandling classified in a secure facility, in an exercise, and I didn't tell my boss about it, trying to save my troop, and got my first and only letter of counseling, and that was, so it's mind blowing what he's doing. But yeah, General Brown didn't get fired for that. He got fired for that one remark, for saying I had a different experience as an African American in uniform. That's what got him fired. That was 4 years ago. He didn't really say, I'm gonna put all these black people and women in leadership positions. I'm gonna change the rules. I'm gonna lower the standards. He didn't do any of that. That's part of that myth. And so we replaced people, put people in place who, well, I won't go into that. I do talk about it in the book, though. People who were less qualified than General Brown, less qualified than General Austin. General Austin was a black 4-star, the first, black commander of CENTCOM. And he's replaced by a guy who was a major, who never really commanded anything. But his qualifications, so I can say MAGA very well, and I can salute the president.
So how do you hope your books impact readers, particularly those in leadership positions?
Well, I'm hoping, again, I wrote the book, and in the very first part of it, I kind of say, this is for leaders who will, because there's so much. So one of my friends challenged me. He's got a PhD. He's a pilot. He was like, you haven't taken like the, pros and cons. You only looked at it from the one side. So I tried to look at it from both sides. I shoot down the arguments. Like, there's a lot of arguments out there that say it can't be good for unit cohesion if we're pointing out our differences. This is the military. We all wear the green uniform or the blue uniform or whatever. So anything that's talking about our differences has got to be detrimental to morale and unit cohesion. Sounds like a good argument. And so then when I'm writing, I'm trying to show them, if you don't really take the time to know me and what's different about me, we're not really going to have that much unity. One of the examples I used in the book was a year or two ago, all the Ukrainian flags were flying all over the country, and everybody had sympathy for the Ukrainians being invaded by Russia. And Caucasian, I can say white, white people kind of understood that. Most people kind of did, but they didn't understand how black people could be upset or sympathize with a George Floyd, who was being basically snuffed out, strangled, stomped out on the street.
That's
and
because
so,
yeah.
But if I can get somebody in a book to make the connection, oh, that's just like having sympathy for Ukraine. These people, even though I don't know the Ukrainians, y'all don't know the Ukrainians, you don't live in Ukraine, probably never been to Ukraine, don't know one word of Ukraine, but you empathize with them, and it affects you in the same way we as African Americans, when things happen like George Floyd, that affects us. And so I'm hoping that maybe some light bulbs will come on, that people will, even though we got a president and a SecDef saying that learning about each other's differences, or like, for example, in the book I put, there was a guy that was hired by the State Department. He got fired for being at a white nationalist rally. He got fired from the previous Trump administration, but got brought back. And he posted this tweet that says, every office needs to be headed by a competent white man. And I'm going, well, if you're my leader and you're white, you need to know that that's going to affect me some kind of way, and you need to think about it in that way, how we're different, or even our upbringing. I put in our book how my father grew up in sharecropping. Mm-hmm. And so it affects how I look at the world. It makes me different. It makes me different. Doesn't make me lower. It just makes me different. And you got to realize that those differences come into play, and you should be sensitive to that. And so I try to communicate that, saying that it's so much better when what's going on with your troops, and know when they might be struggling, or know when they might have a different opinion. And so I would say maybe, like, I don't know if this might be the case, but let's say I have some Hispanic members in my unit and they're worried about the ICE raids, and giving them the latitude to talk about that, or share how that makes them feel, or realize that might impact them, especially like we got all these troops deployed to the border now. There's Latin members in those troops. There's Latin people deployed. And I don't know how they feel like that. Right now, they're not being asked to do anything super heavy, but what if something jumps off? What if, what if they get asked to, because we know in the first first administration, they separated, families and things like that. And we know there's already accidents of people who are American citizens being shipped off,
To Venezuela.
to Venezuela, to Cuba, to Guantanamo. Even one guy who was detained who was a military person, a U.S. citizen, and they still, one person had a birth certificate, like this about birth certificate, and they still didn't want to let him go. When these things start happening, even though that's not your experience, you need to understand that it might affect someone in your unit. And if it's affecting them to a great degree, it can affect their performance. And so you don't necessarily have to be able to understand it, but you may have to listen to it or be aware of it. And so that's what I'm kind to. And then even on a deeper level, realize that there's a chapter in the book I have. It's called A Different Air Force Experience. That Black people often have a different Air Force experience. We experience the Air Force differently in promotions, in assignments, and in these different things. So you're thinking just like when we talk about, like in one of my other books, I talked about African Americans have a different police experience, a different experience with the police. We see the Capitol rioters hitting police with sticks, hockey clubs, macing them and stuff like that, and they don't get shot. And we see people at traffic stops who are unarmed getting shot. And then those people also got pardoned by the president after they hit police officers with sticks and brought weapons and so on and so forth, and trying to communicate that even in the Air Force, there's a different Air Force experience. Like one of the things I write about a lot is this, the being lonely, as a pilot or in a unit, that when you're the only one in the unit, there's added pressure there. And as a person, if you're trying to have unity and camaraderie with me, you need to understand that I go through different things than you do. And it doesn't make me less. Matter of fact, it might make me stronger because I'm doing the same job you're doing. Plus, I'm either trying to hold up the standard for the weight of I'm a Black officer and people are looking at me, or I'm trying to fight against stereotypes. General Brown talked about that. He said people would look at him and assume that he was less than, or a group of pilots, they would assume he wasn't a pilot. General Austin talked about that. I mentioned that in the book, where he would have his white subordinate do his briefings because he knew they would be better received from a white person, and he's the boss. And so those kind of things, my white teammates in my unit, they need to be aware of that, and that it's not an excuse. It just is what it is. It's still culture in 2020, in 2025. There's still people who feel a certain way about Black people, and those things are communicated to us subtly, or sometimes, very directly, causing us to have a different Air Force experience the Air Force differently, or to have different expectations, or even to view you differently. Because now, because of some of my other experiences, I'm looking at you sometimes with a side eye till I figure out where you coming from. Are you safe? And I talk about that in the book as we're talking about trying to find mentors. If there are no Black people in the unit and I'm trying to find a mentor, I got to go through this thing, testing the waters to try to figure out.
Well, see, you're not going to feel comfortable doing that.
But but it's something I have to do.
Yeah,
I still need to find a mentor. So, but that's part of my process. That's part of what makes me different from you as I'm going through the Air Force, especially if I'm a pilot. There aren't very many Black pilots. So in terms of having a Black senior pilot mentor, that's going to be very hard to do. So, I'm trying to communicate that, to the readers of this book. Like I said, I've seen it done. I've seen it where senior leaders in the Air Force have read my books and made changes to Air Force policy. I've seen it. So I'm already encouraged by it, and so I know it can happen again. But I'm also writing it for a new generation of African Americans who don't know, like some of the stories I've quoted in this book is called Forged in Battle, the Civil War Alliance of Black Soldiers and White Officers. I quoted this particular Tuskegee Airman, this Tuskegee Airman, this Tuskegee Airman, a couple other Tuskegee Airmen, because I don't think this younger generation knows. I quoted General Spencer. This guy's from the 70s, his story. I'm bringing in some of these older stories because, believe it or not, when I wrote the first book, I never thought we would have to talk about the racism that my parents went through. Ha ha ha. Was I wrong? So now I'm bringing, in order to defend
Bring it
against some,
forward.
yeah, I'm trying to say, hey, some of these old tricks, they're coming back. And so you need to do some of the things they did back then now to survive. You got to watch your back. You got to do this. You got to do that. And so, but some of these stories, if you don't know the success of the Tuskegee Airmen, then you're going to be at disadvantage when somebody says everybody's a DEI hired. If you don't know General Brown's record, and I go through great detail, or General Austin's record and what he did, all the firsts. General Brown had so many firsts. General Austin had so many firsts, and I'm putting them in the book so some of these young people can realize. I hate to say, like in the 70s, we said, I am somebody. I am somebody. The whole purpose of Black History Month was for Black people to know their own history so they could be encouraged. So that is part of this book too, and that's why it's 500 pages, because I'm putting all this other stuff in there, this historical stuff that shows, hey, there was a time, in our Air Force history and our military history, where we were treated differently, and they overcame and were successful, and you can too, because there's a lot of people going through stuff now that I never even went through. Banning Black History Month on the base, telling Black people they can't get together at the Naval Academy under the name of whatever their group is. We didn't have to experience that. That's worse than when I was in. We've gone backwards. And so to try to give some of these readers, to arm them with some of their own history, is also one of the objectives, where they can see Tuskegee Airmen heroes, and see that some of these things are lies, talking about, well, we don't have enough educated Black people to make a difference. Well, somebody like General Spencer, who who started out enlisted. There's another general I mentioned here. I'll give his whole story. He started out as I think he had a line number for master, made it all the way to major general. He was in like 38 years. No, he was in over 40 years. Over 40, like 43 years, I believe, General Flowers. And then now his son is a general, and his grandson just graduated from the Air Force Academy, and these stories, I hope, encourage, when we're getting all this stuff that says the best of you is less than the least of us. When somebody like Hexeth with no qualifications can come in and fire our best, it makes it look like, if we don't know our own history, well, maybe he wasn't really that qualified. We got to shoot that down. We got to be armed with, that's what Black history was all about. We wanted to show that we weren't just entertainers and Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. We were engineers, and we were doctors, and we were pilots, and we were all these other great and wonderful things. And so in the military realm, I'm trying to put some of that extra history in there to say DEI, or this notion that we've been less, wasn't true in the 1940s, and is not true in 2025 either.
So that just says we go to, as I say, we do Black History 365. And let's talk a little bit about your influence of the Tuskegee Airmen. So what first drew you to the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen?
Good question. We used to have, the Air Force used to pay for us to go to the Tuskegee Airmen National Convention when I was a junior officer, and I knew some of their story. And I met this guy named at that time, Colonel retired McGee. But it wasn't really until I got stationed in LA, I became a member of the chapter in Los Angeles in 2005 timeframe. And there were a whole bunch of Tuskegee Airmen in our chapter, and because LA was one of the bigger chapters, and getting to meet them and know their stories really, really impacted me. Like, one of the guys that I met, he went to school at UCLA. Jackie Robinson was his college roommate. I just hear, yeah. I see his face right now. I can't think of his name. Maybe it'll come to me later. And then he was also one of the officers involved in the what they're calling a mutiny, where Air Force officers insisted on being allowed to go to the Black Officers Club. I wrote about them in another book. But hearing their stories and getting to meet them, fell in love with them. Wrote a song for them, and back in in 2010 that is now their national song. They've adopted it as their national song. Is called Dark Proud Bird. If you look it up on YouTube, Dark Proud Bird, you'll find it, but it's their national song now. And then I put one of their pictures up, a couple of their pictures up on my wall as I was writing this first book to inspire me to finish it, because their stories, I didn't know a lot about the Tuskegee Airmen. My mom didn't either. She didn't know until I started writing the books, and then as I got involved with the Tuskegee Airmen in Los Angeles, when I moved to Arizona, I met even more Tuskegee Airmen and got involved with them. And then I got involved on a national level here in the last couple of years at the conventions, and being the chair of the Military Affairs Committee, I got to meet even more of the Tuskegee Airmen. And then I started writing about more of them in my books. But just meeting them in person, in LA started it, and then we had 3 in Arizona. And then at the conventions, I met some more. And then here in the last 2 years, I've hosted a couple of Zoom calls. One of the calls I hosted was with General Brown. When he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, we had our convention in DC. He popped in and I hosted a Zoom call with him and 4 Tuskegee Airmen, 2 that were in the room, and then 2 or 3 that were coming in from different parts of the country. When you hear their stories or read their books, I started reading their books too. You start reading their books and you realize what they went through and the challenges and stuff they overcame. And then so many of them lived to be in their late 90s. We just lost one here about 4 months ago that I interviewed a couple of times. He was 100. We got a couple that are still, one of them just getting back from Europe. He went on a trip. They had to set up a trip in Italy for where their base was in Italy. He's 103. I met him via Zoom, and you just hear their stories, or you talk to a 100-year-old man or a 97-year-old man, and it just does something for you, and so, and then I think I told you about in the last time we talked, there was Colonel Charles McGee. And God put it on my heart to help him get promoted. It took 7 years. And I wrote a whole chapter about him in this book. I wrote a whole chapter about him in the following book, and used that chapter to lobby Congress. Got General Spencer involved, got the former Secretary of the Air Force involved, a couple of my Academy classmates who were lobbyists, lobbied Congress, lobbied the Pentagon. And in a 7-year process, we got Colonel McGee honorarily promoted to 1-star general. And so that I'm probably most proud of that in terms of, working with them. And I only got to meet him one time on his 100th birthday. They had a party for him on his 100th birthday in DC. I got to shake his hand, but I got to know his kids really well because I was working with them and the Congress and a couple of congressmen. Dick Durbin, as a matter of fact, was getting ready to retire. He was one of our congressmen that was helping push this. But when you learned about his record and what he accomplished, and knowing that the only reason he didn't become a general is because he was Black. He had one of the greatest flying records in Air Force history. And when I read about it in his book, I didn't believe it. That's so bad when you think, okay, you got the greatest flying record, and you go ahead. I'm sorry, I see you got a question.
No, yeah. So how has their story influenced your career and your personal philosophy?
I hate to say that I learned more about their story after I retired than when I was in, but it's true. I learned way more about them after I retired than what I was in. But I think the more I learn about them, what it has influenced me to do is talk more about them in the books that I write. Like I said, in this particular book that I just finished, I quoted 3 Tuskegee Airmen books, and I included a full 2 interviews, 1 Zoom interview, and 2 more transcribed interviews. So I'm putting their stories in everything. So I mean, I was pretty much retired though, because I left LA in 2010 when I retired, and I'd only really known the Tuskegee Airmen in LA. And then when I went to Arizona, I met them. And then in my other capacity in the national office, I really got to meet a lot more of them and a lot of their spouses. So I would say it affects my writing more maybe than my career, because now my career is different. It's writing and acting and stuff like that.
So what lessons do you think are most relevant today?
Ooh, that's a good one. Man, you know, and it's a tough one, and I hope to live up to it. But that we all have a legacy. We're all, somebody's watching you, and so whether that is your nephews, your godsons, your children, that we all have a chance to carry the banner, if you will. We're all put here to do something. These men, didn't know that what they were doing at the time was heroic.
Mhm.
They didn't know at the time what they were doing was heroic. They just answered the call for their country. And then years later, these men were in their 80s when they got the 80s and 90s when they got the Congressional Gold Medal and really started getting their due for what they did. But then they also went into the communities and became leaders in the community. So if I would say anything from the greatest generation, I think the greatest generation knew that they had leadership responsibility in the community. And I think as African American men, that's something that we call it, don't forget where you came from or give back to the community. I think their greatest lesson, I have one of the Tuskegee Airmen, one of the guys, his wife gave me one of his hats and one of
Oh, I like that hat.
his t-shirts.
Yeah.
But these people went back into the community, and some of them, like Coleman in Detroit, Mayor of Detroit, and went into different or academia or whatever, and became leaders, and I think, we as African American men can learn from that we, no matter how big that leadership responsibility is, maybe you're, a deacon in church, maybe you're just the old man on the neighborhood. Hey, cut that out. Hey, young blood, stop that. We don't do that here,
Mhm.
But this idea that we have an obligation to give back and to pour back into the people behind us. There was so much that they were fighting for. The whole thing, the double V, the double victory, victory at home, victory abroad. I think we have in our generation become so much more segmented and isolated, thinking about me, my four, no more. We leave certain things to the church or the politicians, or people in the military, and maybe don't think that we all have a responsibility to give back to our community, in some way. I mean, it's going to be different. You're like, for you, this podcast is that, my books are that, where we're giving back and we're trying to impact on those behind us. And so I would think just their legacy, because there are a couple years from now, there won't be any of them. There's only one Tuskegee Airman left that flew in combat. One.
Mhm.
Um, and so pretty soon there won't be any Tuskegee Airmen pilots left. And how do we carry the spirit of what they did? This idea that this the pride, the leadership. I think that's something that as men, as Black men especially, we need to ask ourselves, because there's so many other things that we could chase, you know. And some of them are good, good things. But while we're building ours, we still need to look out for.
I think it's all good. I think it's all good because, I mean, we want to stay in the present, but in order to stay in the present, we definitely have to know and have to learn. This is what happened. This is what transcribed. This is what transpired. This is why we are here today. So if we know what was missing, what did happen, how it happened, and knowing that that is just not right, then what that does is that gives us the blueprint to make the plan to set it going forward. That's what we have to do. That's what we're doing right now.
Right.
And I got one more question for you because you got ahead of me with your answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How do you incorporate their legacy into your work and writings?
Yeah. So one of the things I'm trying to do is communicate some of the struggles that they went through as African Americans, because like I said, the people in the military now are going through struggles as Black people that I didn't go through, and I'm older than them. I've been retired 15 years and they're going through stuff I didn't go through. And so I'm thinking, as I share some of the racism and the bias that were encountered in generations before, that it might help people that are going through things now, that are blatant. more blatant than when I was in. And then also some of these stories, when you read them, you can't help but be inspired. Even this was a throwaway book. Somebody threw this away in my last apartment. You know, people put in New York, they just throw it under the steps or something. I was like, I didn't think I would ever read this. You know, I was like, I just look through here and you read something. That one of the things I found in my book was that, or my research was that Eisenhower, because of just the needs of war, asked black service troops, because service, you know, black people, they dug the trenches, they, you know, did all the dirty work, if they would volunteer for combat. And they volunteered. And what this Harvard study showed is that when black and white people worked together, some of those stereotypes fell off. And that's what my father used to always say. He said, it's just ignorance. Because most people, white people, when they get to know me, they some of their stereotypes change. And what I'm seeing and what I tried to convey was, even as far back as Civil War, this was happening. Even before Ike, you know, that there needs to, there's this there's a knowing of each other's differences, you know, that needs to happen so that we can be more effective, you know, and just show some of the struggles, man. I put some stuff in there. It's almost like, I don't want to say this because they might ban my book. No, I'm just kidding. You know, I'm putting stuff in there about how, like, that just fascinated me, and I'm hoping it fascinates others. Like, I found in here where they were talking about when these black people joined the Civil War regiments, all the white people were officers doing the medical exams, and they're finding these people's backs had been just shredded with whips, and part of their ears had been clipped off, and all these atrocities that happened to these people, you know, and then how black people weren't getting equal pay, all the things that, you know, forgotten, you know, things, race riots. I include some of the race riots of the 70s, how white people couldn't understand why black people were so enamored with Dr. King when Dr. King was protesting the war. And to show these differences over the years that we, as African Americans, we have a different experience, even from Civil War. You know, what these people went through, and some of that history is fascinating to me. When you read about, he said this dude said the welts on the guy's back were like 2 fingers deep. You know, that all the skin had been beaten off this young man's back because he fell asleep. I mean, these stories, it's kind of like almost like critical race theory. I don't want to call it that, but you know, I'm putting some of that in on purpose, you know, to kind of show we've always been different. Mm-hmm. Our history in military service has always been different. We've always had to go through more. It's not a new thing, you know, for us to kind of have to overcome. And you look at, you know, just like I said, what some of the Tuskegee Airmen went through, I found out that in my research stuff, I didn't know, like, many of them were purposely washed out, not because they couldn't fly, but because they didn't want to make any more segregated facilities.
Exactly.
So they capped the number off. So it was like, we're not creating any more segregated facilities, so we have to wash a certain number of qualified people out. Now, I had heard that in interviews with Tuskegee Airmen that I'd done before, but when I saw it in writing in a book, where, you know, and then I found something in the history books that said when white pilots washed out of fighters, they let them go to bombers.
Yep.
Well, they didn't let black people do that because they didn't have segregated facilities for that, you know. And then they gave them fighters on purpose. Somebody didn't know about the history, and I've written 3 books on it. They gave them the fighters, I thought, for one reason, but what they said was part of the reason they gave it to them because fighters were harder to fly, because you had to be the navigator, the weapons operator, and the pilot. Whereas on a bomber, you got a bombardier, you got gunners, you got navigators, and so they gave them the hardest plane to fly, and they figured it out, and they were successful. And then in the 70s, when they wanted to make all the fighter pilot leaders be white fighter pilots, now they had to flip the script and say that fighters, you know, these fighters that y'all was flying from the 1940s to the 70s, you know, that, you know, now we're gonna put y'all in bombers that we said was too hard for y'all to fly. We'll put y'all all over here, take you out of fighters because fighters are too hard to fly. Well, when you put them in it, you were saying they were the easiest to fly, you know, but now that we want these all our generals to be fighter pilots. And to see that change in history and to see racism at work and to show people that history, it's ugly. Some people are not going to like it. It's ugly, but it did happen. And I think even though that's the whole despair or angst about critical race theory, was that people don't want to be reminded of the past. They want to move on. They don't want to talk about it. But I'm kind of talking about it on purpose, kind of say, yeah, it did happen. And there's things happening right now, like General Brown being fired, like you sullying his name and saying he was a diversity hire, with immunity. You're able to say that lie, and people need to know it's not a new trick, but that we've always been competent. We've always performed valiantly, whether it was a Civil War, World War One, World War II, Vietnam, Iraq. We've always been there, even when what we were getting out of the deal wasn't the same as what our white counterparts were getting out of the deal. Even when we knew that, even when we knew we wasn't, every war, Civil War, they thought they were going to get, it's going to change some things. World War II, we're going to fight because we think it's going to change some things. Korea, and, and so you don't want people to come out with this whole negative thing, but the truth is the truth. And then there's a whole political bit in this book that wasn't in the last book saying, hey, okay, what can we do different? If they won't let you do this, what can you do? Us who are retired and have a retirement check and safety, we should be doing the most. We should be on programs like this and speaking out, because people in uniform can't speak out.
Exactly.
They'll get cut off at the knees. People, and maybe we should re-examine who we vote for. Because military should stay out of politics. Well, maybe you would change that now, because you realize that with this election that they went too far, and you let the wrong person get into the wrong place, and all this havoc is being wreaked, in our military. And so I haven't gone there in my military books in the past, but when I start researching it, I start finding out things that, depending on who was president, either diversity was advanced in the military or not. Whether it's Lyndon Johnson or Nixon or Kennedy, even Truman. I thought Truman, there was a story about a guy named Isaac Woodard, who I'd never heard of. Isaac Woodard, sorry. I always thought, they said Tuskegee Airmen influenced Truman to integrate the military services. But I found this story, and it was on PBS, which is going away. About this one Negro soldier who had come home from the war, got into an altercation with the bus driver because the bus driver called him a boy or something like that. I'm a man, same as you. Bus driver goes ahead and alerts the police. He gets up, they stop the bus, the police take him off, and the policeman beats him up and gouges his eyes out with a police stick. And this story, I don't want to go through the whole thing. You can look it up. It's an amazing story, and it's on PBS. But the story hits Truman, who was a veteran, who knows what it's like to come home. And it impacted him so powerfully that it helped lead him signing the desegregation order, because the guy was never brought to justice. And I had never heard his story, and I'm thinking, man, stories like that, and that are in this book, they'll let people know here was a man that served his country, came back in one piece and gets his eyes gouged out with a police stick, at a bus station.
At home, not at war.
Yeah, not at war. And those stories, we need to kind of know those stories, and they do make us uncomfortable, but it's part of our heritage in the military, and we need to realize that unchecked things may not get as bad as that again, but they can still get bad. And I try to put some scenarios in there where that could happen. Like, we know that I put in there that in our previous administration, Trump wanted to sic the National Guard on the Black Lives protesters and asked the general if he could shoot him in the leg. Can't you just shoot him in the leg?
He said, hell no.
He said, hell no. That's why he got him a puppet. People he could control, people who didn't earn their way, people who don't have the same kind of integrity. I shouldn't say integrity. We'll see, because they're going to get tested.
They don't have integrity. So as we go now, in closing, what is some of the things you like for our audience to know? What are some words of wisdom that you can give them, as well as tell them how to connect with you, where they can find you, where they can find the books, all that good stuff.
Okay. So I guess the biggest announcement for me is that my next book, The Air Force's Black DEI Myths, should hit this week. So you can look for that. You can find me on Audible. I have 28 titles on Audible. I have 35 plus titles on Amazon. You can find me on Instagram at Ivan Live 360. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on TikTok. Um, Words of wisdom. I I may not always reflect it, but my true north or my guiding star is my relationship with God, through Jesus Christ, and that guides me in most things. I try to make that my milestone. Without it, I would be a wreck because just the stuff going on in the White House or whatever would make me cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, or I would just be like I'm old enough to remember when Roots came out and just watching Roots made you want to hate all white people. Well, that's not right. And I know that's not, but my Christian beliefs keep me grounded and then help me give me the grace to do all the stuff that I'm doing with auditions and writing books. Here I am. I got to audition. I'm recording an audition right after I get off here. After today, finishing, publishing a 500 plus page book. That's my center. That's what keeps me grounded. That's what gives me hope. Um, that's what helps me to be kind to all men. Even those who, what they say, who deceitfully abuse you or just speak evil of you. Um, what else? My music, I am on Spotify. I do have recordings on Spotify and YouTube. And I wanted to close also by thanking you, Charles, for having me back again. I definitely appreciate it, and I hope this this segment helps you in what you're doing and your efforts with your podcast.
Well, I definitely appreciate that. And for those of you that were just watching this wonderful show, you should learn not only the importance of leadership, but the importance of having integrity and being authentic with those that are under you. Because if you're not being an authentic person and you're not doing things the proper way, the message that I got from Ivan is that that can always go astray in the wrong way. So those that's got some integrity and you are leading people, make sure that that you do the one thing that was just pointed out earlier tonight. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Do not, and I repeat, do not go out and just try to make people feel less than because you feel like you got power, because it's not about the power. Because I can guarantee you, everybody knows who she is. She's called Karma. When she comes back, she don't have to hit you. Just think about that. She don't have to hit you, but you will feel her. Love everybody the way you want to be loved. Treat people the way you want to be treated. And everything else is what it's supposed to be. Those of you that were watching on the YouTube channel, if you have not done so yet, I would appreciate it. And we would love to have your support. So if you would please subscribe, hit the notifications button. You'll be able to watch every show live as we broadcast, or you'll have the opportunity to go back and watch all of the many broadcasts that have been done, including tonight's show. We thank you for watching, and we definitely want your continued support. I want to thank you, Ivan, for being here. And once we get off this off the show tonight, I definitely need to contact you because I've got some things I want to run by you that I hope that you're probably interested in. So for those of you that are watching, please Please have a wonderful afternoon, a wonderful evening. You guys tomorrow night, again at the same time, 6 p.m. Eastern Time on America in Black and White.